Hello and welcome back to my amateur radio general license course. You know, antennas are to amateur radio what wheels are to cars. Without them, we aren't going to go very far, and the type and the quality will determine just how far we can go. It's vital to understand antennas no matter if you're going to build them, use them, or purchase them. Are you ready to learn? Well, let's get started. This is the Amateur Radio General Class License Course, Lesson 9, Part 2. I am your instructor, KE2GS, that's Kilo Echo 2 Golf Sierra, and my handle is Gary Stevens. This is SUBELEMENT G9. There are 4 exam questions from 4 groups for a total of 54 questions. And this license pool covers 2019 to 2023 General Class FCC Element 3 question pool that went into effect July 1st, 2019. This segment covers antennas and feed lines. We're going to be talking about directional antennas as well as specialized antennas. So let's dive right in with part G9C, directional antennas. With Yagi antennas, the size of the elements affect the bandwidth. The larger the diameter of the element, the more bandwidth you have. For the exam, you need to know that a larger diameter element would increase the bandwidth of a Yagi antenna. The driven element of a Yagi is also the feed point. It is where the feed line is attached coming from your transmitter. A dipole driven element is resonant when its electrical length is half of the wavelength of the frequency applied to its feed point. For the exam, you need to know that approximate length of a driven element of a Yagi is 1/2 wavelength. Shortest element of a Yagi antenna is the director. As the name implies, the Yagi director points the way towards the receiving station. Conversely, the reflector is always the most elongated element in a Yagi array. For the exam, you need to know that when comparing the lengths of a 3-element Yagi, reflector, and director to that of the driven element, the reflector is longer and the director is shorter. And for the exam, we need to know the difference between dBi and dBd. dBi refers to an isotropic radiator, which is a theoretical isotropic antenna. Or the dBd is a dipole antenna, which is a real-life antenna. So it's a comparison between a theoretical and a real-life model. And typically, the difference between an isotropic radiator and a dipole is typically a 2.15 dB difference. So for the exam, you need to know that if an antenna gain stated in dBi is compared to the gain of a antenna stated in dBd, the dBi gain figures are 2.15 dB higher than the dBd gain figures. As you can see by the chart, the boom length, as you increase it, it increases the gain as well. But also if you increase the number of directors. So theoretically speaking, if you have one director, you get 3 dB of gain. The second one will give you an additional 2 dB, and a third director will give you 1.5 dB gain. For the exam, you need to know that increasing the boom length and adding directors affects the Yagi antenna by causing gain increases. Just like with the Yagi, if we're going to have a reflector with a quad, it needs to be larger than the driven element. For the exam, you need to know that the configuration of the loops of the 2-element quad antenna that makes it operate as a beam antenna, assuming one of the elements is used as a reflector, is the reflector element must be approximately 5% longer than the driven element. A front-to-back ratio is nothing more than showing how much power is being radiated forward rather than backwards or behind the antenna. For the exam, you need to know that the power radiated in the major radiation lobe compared to that in the opposite direction is what is meant by front-to-back ratio in reference to a Yagi antenna. You can see in this diagram, most of the radiant energy is in the main lobe, which is going forward. For the exam, you need to know that the direction of the maximum radiated field strength from an antenna is what is meant by the main lobe of a directive antenna. Earlier, we talked about increasing antenna gain by increasing the boom length. There's also a notion of stacking antennas, which gives you a significant better gain. For the exam, you need to know that the gain of two 3-element horizontally polarized Yagi antennas spaced vertically 1/2 wavelength apart typically compare in gain to a single 3-element Yagi antenna. It's approximately 3 dB higher. So far we've talked about the front-to-back ratio, the forward gain, and bandwidth of Yagi antennas. For the exam, you need to know that the following can be adjusted to optimize forward gain, front-to-back ratio, or SWR bandwidth of a Yagi antenna. And that's the physical length of the boom, the number of elements in the boom, and the spacing of each element along the boom. But on the test, mark all the above is correct. The nice thing about directional antennas is that you can point it to the direction of where you want to receive your signals from. For the exam, you need to know that a directional antenna is an HF antenna that would be best to use for minimizing interference. Gamma match is used with Yagi antennas to match the relatively low feed point impedance to 50 ohms. For the exam, they want you to know that the advantage of using a gamma match with a Yagi antenna is that it does not require that the driven element be isolated from the boom. Once you get into the world of HF radio, you may be tempted to build your own antenna, and there's a plethora of calculators that are free online and various websites. But this one is used here to show the test question is accurate. And the test question you need to know is that each side of a driven element for a quad antenna is approximately 1/4 wavelength. Sometimes you'll find that the antennas are equal in performance no matter what style they are. And this is one case, where you're comparing a 2-element quad with a 3-element Yagi. For the exam, you need to know that when comparing a forward gain of a 2-element quad to the forward gain of a 3-element Yagi antenna, they're about the same. And this question we spoke about earlier, about the difference between the DBI and DBD. Again, DBI is an isotropic radiator and DBD is a dipole antenna. For the exam, they want you to know that what is meant by the terms DBI and DBD when referring to an antenna gain is that DBI refers to an isotropic antenna and DBD refers to a dipole antenna. Earlier we spoke of gamma matching, and now we're going to talk about beta matching. They're essentially the same, perform the same function. For the exam, you need to know that the best description for a beta or a hairpin match is it is a shortened transmission line stub placed at the feed point of a Yagi antenna to provide impedance matching. Section G9D, Gulf 9 Delta, deals with specialized antennas. NVIS, or near vertical incidence skywave, refers to a propagation method that provides usable signals that are usually anywhere from 0 to 400 miles apart. The military often uses NVIS in jungles and mountainous terrain where such obstacles interfere with line-of-sight communication. For the exam, you need to know that a horizontal dipole placed between 1/10 and 1/4 wavelength above ground is an antenna type that will be most effective as a near vertical incident skywave, or NVIS, antenna for short skip communications on 40 meters during the day. Tandem wire antenna is a type of end-fed half-wave antenna, and it typically has a very high impedance, and it requires a antenna tuner as shown in the diagram. For the exam, you need to know that the feed point impedance of an end-fed half-wave antenna is very high. Have you ever seen ham radio antennas that look like basketball hoops? Those are called halo antennas. As you can see by the chart, the radiation pattern is pretty much omnidirectional. For the exam, you need to know that the direction of maximum radiation from portable VHF, UHF halo antenna is omnidirectional in the plane of the halo. Trap is simply a parallel resonance circuit that's strategically placed along an antenna to trap certain resonant frequencies. For the exam, you need to know that the primary purpose of an antenna trap are to permit a multiband operation. We talked about stacking before. They also want you to know for the exam that the advantage of vertical stacking of horizontally polarized Yagi antennas is that it narrows the main lobe in elevation. Another type of antenna is a log periodic antenna, and they're designed to work over a wide range of frequencies. For the exam, you need to know that the advantage of a long periodic antenna is that it has a wide bandwidth. Another thing you need to know about the log periodic antenna for the exam is that an antenna whose element length and spacing vary logarithmically along the boom best describes a log periodic antenna. Another type of antenna is a screwdriver antenna. And a screwdriver antenna is a vertical antenna with a remotely adjustable center loading coil. It works similar to an antenna tuner. For the exam, you need to know that a screwdriver mobile antenna adjusts its feed point impedance by varying the base loading inductance. The Beveridge antenna was named after its inventor, Harold H. Beveridge, and he invented it in 1921. For the exam, you need to know that the primary use of a Beveridge antenna is a directional receiving for low HF bands. This diagram is for a magnet, but it works for an antenna loop as well. You can see the radiation lobes, and you can see the null points. For the exam, you need to know the direction or directions of an electrically small loop. That's one that's less than 1/3 wavelength in circumference, has nulls in its radiation pattern that are broadside to the loop. Years ago, I actually built one of these multi-band antennas, and I can attest for the truth in this question and the answer. For the exam, you need to know that a disadvantage of a multi-band antenna is that they have poor harmonic rejection. Perhaps driving around, you've seen an antenna that looks like this, with it looks like a upside down V, and that's how the inverted V gets its name. For the exam, you need to know that an inverted V is an uncommon name for a dipole with a single central support. The horizontal loop antenna, which is also known as loop skywire antenna, is a very old but effective design. The main purpose of constructing it is to create an omnidirectional antenna that provides multiband capability. This antenna performs well from the lowest frequency to the band for which it was designed, all the way up through 10 meters. For the exam, you need to know that the combined vertical and horizontal polarization pattern of the multi-wavelength horizontal loop antenna is virtually omnidirectional with a lower peak vertical radiation angle than a dipole. And that completes Lesson 9, Part 2. I hope that you've enjoyed today's video. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, never stop learning.